record, and then it's up to me to say I'm very happy to share my insights with you on behavioral change. And why did I choose this topic? Because it's a relevant topic. Whenever I'm in working in individual coachings, team coachings, whenever we work around getting more effective in whatever situation, it comes always to changing behavior. And it's even more relevant now, and we've been confronted with it now, all of us, I think, and experienced what it does with someone and how challenging it sometimes can be. So that's why I chose this topic. But first, I want to make some agreements on the practical side, the technical side, not my habit yet. But I see there are 12 participants. So if you want to ask something, you can write it in the chat box, or you can maybe unmute yourself. We're not that many. I think in 30 minutes, it's not feasible to have a lot of discussions, but please, if you want to share something, don't hesitate to do so. May I, first of all, invite you to note down in the chat box one change you made in your behavior recently. For example, I've been doing more exercise, twice a week, bike rides, and I've been walking. Yeah, someone else also. Yeah. Going to the woods to relax. I've been working a lot online, online coachings and online workshops. I see people, for example, instead of training in the gym, that they're following trainings through Zoom sessions. We've been online informal contacts, yeah, the connecting part. Baking bread, that's an important one also. There was a time that you couldn't find the ingredients no more in the shop. We all changed a lot. We had to change. And there were changes we had to do because it was expected from us, but there were also changes we wanted to do because we had the opportunity to do so. Now, the insights I want to share with you come out of these 4 sessions. Why did I choose those sessions? First of all, because of the title, and then because of the speakers, because we knew they were very enthusiastic from the past experience we had with them. And it was, well, it was nice to have their ideas and have information on the research they did in the last period on this topic. And I want to start with talking about the messages of Sebastian Bailey. We're quite fan of Sebastian because he's very clear and an enthusiastic speaker. And he's a man of mind chain. And he talked about the 10 best kept secrets in behavior change. And his message is, well, unveil them, take them into account. And the 10 things he talked about, here you can see the list. Some of them are recognizable. Some of them are more complicated. And I want to share with you 4 of them. Why those 4? Because they were very recognizable to us, or because it was really an eye-opener for me. And I want to start with the first one, that is go beyond capability. And what does he mean by that? It is that whenever we want to change a behavior, people having changed behavior, then we have, in first instance, we try to support them in developing skills, in developing knowledge, so that they're capable of doing so. And that's the first step. For example, when I want to install a feedback culture in my company, the first thing I do is organize workshops for people to have insights on how to give feedback, how to seek for feedback, how to receive feedback and criticism. When I want to work online, the first thing is to look for the right tool and to at least get acquainted with the tool, because we still have to learn a lot, I'm sure of it. And often it stops then. But he says there is also another influencing factor, and that's the environment. What is expected from you that to do? For example, when they say to me as a team member, you have to take part in the culture of feedback, but my team lead is never giving feedback, is never asking feedback, there's no time to give feedback, there is, well, maybe even not much interest in what I'm doing, then I won't be motivated to give my feedback, because it's clear that it's not expected from me. If I look at the example of working online, well, we had to. We had to do it, all of us had to do it. It was the only way of doing business for some of us. And well, we had to develop that. It was expected. And then a third factor of influence is the motivation. Yeah, the motivation. Looking for what's happening on the level of motivation is not that simple, but I often hear the remark, they don't want to change. Sometimes even, well, they're just not doing it. Maybe they're too lazy, they don't have the energy. And, or other people are very motivated. When you go back to the changes you made in the last few months, and you look at barriers for yourself, can you write down in the chat box whether it were barriers on the level of capability, you didn't know how to do it, you didn't have the skills, on the opportunity, it wasn't, or it was expected from you because it's possible you overcame the barriers, or was it a question of motivation? May I invite you to write it in the chat box? Yeah, opportunity and motivation, I see. Motivation, opportunity, motivation. Yeah. And it's not the first thing that comes in mind, huh? It's very recognizable. Well, maybe it's challenging to work on that, but we really, it's playing a role, and it's a very impactful factor, motivation. And when we're talking about motivation, we all know that intrinsic motivation, having the motivation yourself, is a forceful instrument, far more impactful than having external motivation. And that's what led me to the second speaker, namely Cy Wakeman. And if you have followed our ATD sessions before, Christine, who is here now, explained her ideas on no ego, with change management. And it's also the lady of reality-based leadership. Very enthusiastic lady. I really can advise you to follow her podcasts, where she is explaining how to apply this reality-based leadership in very specific situations. It's something to follow, interesting. And when she talks about leading, and specifically about intrinsic motivation, and I'm trying to go to the next slide, okay. She says that what's the role of a leader? In fact, it's teaching and enable people and creating mental processes in people so they can reflect themselves and make their own decisions, what to do with certain situations. So in fact, it's about explaining a why, and that's what she calls business readiness, because everything, your goal is to get people ready for the business. But she says also enable people to self-reflect, and it can be very concrete, give them the time to self-reflect, to ask them the right questions to self-reflect. And the right question to self-reflect could be, well, what, in order to fulfill this new aspect of the function in the future, what is something you have to grow? What is something you have to develop to get to the, to deliver the results we expect from you? If you have the time, I'm listening to the podcast now whenever I'm in the car. So it's very interesting. The next one that I took out of the list is activate the not so secret identity. And why? Because it was kind of an eye-opener for me. And I think it's recognizable, but we don't think of it in first instance. And before going into that, I would like you to write down on a piece of paper, you don't have to share it in the chat box, 20 statements about yourself, about your identity. Yeah? For example, I'm a coach, I'm a consultant, I'm a psychologist, I'm a supporter, I'm a connector, I like to think I'm a people person and a warm person. And most of the times after 8 to 12 sentences, it becomes more difficult. Yeah? But we have an image of ourselves. And that image will influence our changing behavior, or the way we change behavior or sustain behavior. Huh? To give you an example, I really had difficulty with the fact that I couldn't hug people anymore. I see myself as someone warm and a hugger. Yeah? And it took me really concentration each time when I saw something, someone from a distance, not to go towards them and hug them. Yeah? Meanwhile, I found an alternative. I'm hugging now virtually because the elbow touch is a bit of impersonal for me. Now, I was explaining this to Valerie, and for those who know Valerie, she said, I don't have any difficulty with that. And that's probably due to the fact that she doesn't see herself as a hugger. So what can you do as a leader whenever you want to help people to change behavior? Just maybe try to make them conscious and reflect on how do I see myself? And then encourage them to look at themselves in a certain way that helps to change the behavior. So that's the main idea of this topic. And then everyone lies. And I took that one because I saw it and I said, wow, that's strong quote, but judging. Yeah? But when he explained it, I really understood what he meant by it. In changing behavior, it is very important to look for data. You have to know what's the starting position, where do we want to get at the end, and eventually what are the barriers, analysis of the barriers, and so on. We need data, and almost every data we find or we use are quite biased, and they are subjective. And in order to get the right results, the right effect, it is important to have objective data and representative data. It doesn't mean that you have to be suspicious, but it is the advice to look for more sources of data. For example, something I hear often now is team managers who really are challenged by the fact that they have to lead team meetings online with 20 or even more people. If I hear that story, then in the first instance, it is the person himself who gives their idea. So it's already biased. Then it is good to, for example, ask team members for their ideas or their experience, their feedback. To that, I can maybe join the team meeting, and then I have more and other ideas from another point of view, and even maybe lead a team meeting with the specific team. And that will help me to get far more objective results. And then the last one, form an orderly queue. This is not new, because the importance of getting as soon as possible to a habit with a trigger, a reward, and in between the action. We talked about it, and in fact, it was again Christine who explained the idea of the habit loop last year of Charles Duhigg. He also had a session, an on-demand session, but an online session recorded, and where he explained again his habit loop. But he said also that now in the times of disruptions, everything is changing, has changed, and will certainly change in the future. That it is the ideal time to look for opportunities, and to be very aware of the triggers that we can use, the triggers maybe that are no longer there, and how to replace them. And also think about triggers that we can keep even when we can see each other again. So think in advance about the quality of triggers and how they can help you to keep on following the habits. And a second idea he mentioned was to keep in mind that emotional rewards are the most effective. And an emotional reward is giving attention to people, do things to give them a good feeling. And then I'm going back to the connection that Jeff is talking about, or probably since you are the fourth session, heard already talk about. The last session I want to talk to about now is the session of Kenneth Nowak. And Kenneth Nowak, he wrote a book, Clueless, on the necessary ingredients of behavior change. In the title you already see it's also about neuroscience, so you probably will recognize what he's saying. But his main idea was there's a big difference between in starting with a habit or a behavior and keeping on doing it. He says for getting started, this especially the motivation that's important. And to keep on doing it, you have to develop a habit. And then I think this is recognizable for you since you've already heard Valerie talk about it. That is that apparently there are two systems in our brains connected with habits. There's on the one hand, there's the will, and on the other hand is the way. The will is the relaxing part, the motivation part, the visualization of how things should advance. And the way is more the concentration, focus part. How am I going to keep on doing this? And he gave some practical hacks, some practical advices to maximize results. The first one is really linked to the intrinsic motivation, because he says, well, don't focus on the different tasks to get there, but focus on the end goal. And Crystal, I see you. I think you can recognize Stephen Covey within it, the ideas of Stephen Covey. When he was talking about this, I immediately thought about Stephen Covey. Another one is, and that's also a recognizable one, is in the beginning of the way to get to your end goal, focus on what's already done, because that's the most motivating. And at the end, it is good to look at what's left to do, because at that moment, that's the most motivating part. Create shorter middles. His advice is chunk an end goal in sub goals. Why? Because apparently our brain is getting tired towards the middle, and there's really a slack in motivation at that moment. Hacks on the part of the way. What was special, I think, is that he really emphasized that we should get away from the SMART action plans. He says you will get more results with an if-then practice plan. Yeah? And that can be the link with a certain moment in a day. There can be the link with a certain moment in the week. For example, when I look at myself, and that's a new habit. I have a FaceTime chat with an uncle of mine who is 87. In the past, I saw him once in a while. Now I hear him and I see him 3 times a week. And it's really Monday, Wednesday and Friday at noon, we have our chat, and I really know if then I have to do it. And I even experienced that when, due to circumstances, I couldn't have the FaceTime at that moment, and I put it on another hour, that I already sensed that, ooh, I'm forgetting, ooh, I'm too late. And he says, that's the way you should proceed in installing new behavior and developing new habits. I think you recognize the fact that, we need sleep. It's good to have our full capacity, that we sleep enough. And for example, when we learn something new, it's good to exercise. Apparently, when you go exercise for 30 minutes after you have learned, and he's talking about a time delay of 4 hours, it stimulates our memory, and we will retain what we've learned easier. Yeah. The third one, and that's also I think a special one, because he says practice makes better, but it doesn't make perfect, and it's against the 10,000 hours of practicing rule. Remember Malcolm Gladwell? He says it's not proven, and keep goals realistic. That's the most important part to advance and to keep on doing things. And then when you've got to know them, you've got to know when to fold them. Don't give up too soon. But when you see that it is really hard to keep on investing in developing that new habit, maybe it's better to stop then, because otherwise you risk having health problems and it becomes far too hard for the brain also. So those are the hacks, and I'll share them with you when you get the slides. And if you have questions on it, please go ahead. We're not that many, so eventually you can unmute yourself or you can write it down in the chat box. What are the takeaways of this session? So if possible, try to identify the possible barriers whenever you have to choose an approach in changing behavior. The second one is enable people to self-reflect, get them business ready, ask the right questions and let them decide on how. Give them the why, but let them decide on the how. Understand how they see themselves and how it is influencing their behavior and their capability of changing things. Have objective data, look for objective data and try to have different points of view when you want to focus on results by changing a behavior. Develop as soon as possible the habits and use some practical hacks and you'll get the list. Okay, what are there things we still have 3 minutes, only 3 minutes. It's really a rat race. Huh? But do you want to share something with your colleagues who are here now? Do you recognize things?
Yeah, just to, because indeed I followed Sebastian Bailey and Cy Wakeman and Charles Duhigg. And so it was already in the past at other previous ATD conferences. But I think certainly the habits, of course, I already talked about it in the past, but I think this is really a momentum because of everything that has been going on to really have a different look at the habits. And so, for example, last week I was doing a session with an audit team. And so one of the first things I told them and I asked them in order to get connection was, how do you feel now? What happened? So check on an emotional level how they felt. And then to see, okay, what are the new habits you acquired in your job? And which ones do you want to keep and which ones do you want to go back to normal as soon as possible?
Yeah.
Because you want, and
so
so
maybe too hard to change.
yeah. And so I think this is really the momentum to check with teams, with people you work with. Okay, we had this quite strange period. What did we learn from it? What are the new habits we all want to continue to really develop? And what are the ones that we say we will get rid of them very soon? Yeah. I think that this momentum is important.
Yeah, that's what he said also, and I must agree. Huh? There are certainly, I started anyway with habits that really have a positive effect. Huh? And also maybe because there is the opportunity in the environment. Huh? Mm-hmm. The time I normally spend in my car driving home, now I spend on my bike doing a bike ride. So it's and probably when you go for a walk during lunch in the woods, maybe it's difficult to keep on doing whenever we go back to our regular situation, but it will always be a new situation. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I thank you very much. And if you have questions afterwards, or for example, if you want me to look further to have more insights, let me know. We're, as long as these sessions are online, and I think it's still the end of August, we'll be busy with learning. And we're always happy to share this with you. Thank you.